Mother abandons bag on sidewalk, and homeless man makes discovery that shocks the city. Harold Johnson woke up to the biting cold of the early New York City morning seeping through the cardboard he used as a blanket. At 62, his joints ached from the icy concrete sidewalk where he had slept for nearly 3 years. But it wasn't the cold that fully woke him. It was a strange sound nearby. A faint cry, almost a whimper, that didn't sound like a cat or a dog. Harold got up slowly, adjusting his faded denim jacket, his faithful companion against the elements. The beige sweater underneath had seen better days, but it still offered some comfort. His tired eyes scanned the empty street in Greenwich Village, illuminated only by streetlights, casting yellow circles on the damp pavement. That's when he spotted the beige bag abandoned on the sidewalk, just a few feet from where he had spent the night. An ordinary grocery bag, but something about it was different. The sound was coming from inside. Harold approached cautiously. Life on the streets had taught him that not everything harmless truly was. When he bent down and carefully opened the bag, his heart nearly stopped. Inside, wrapped in a light blue blanket, was a baby, a tiny child no more than a few weeks old, crying softly with its eyes closed. Its little hands fluttered in the air, searching for something, for someone. "Dear Lord," Harold whispered, looking around to see if anyone was nearby. The street was completely deserted. The clock at the nearby church read 4:30 in the morning. Harold picked up the bag with extreme care, feeling the delicate weight of life in his calloused hands. The baby was clean, well cared for, dressed in a light blue outfit that looked new. There was also a half-full bottle and a folded tote. With trembling fingers, he opened the paper and read the handwritten words, "Please take care of him. I can't anymore. I'm sorry." There was no signature, no clue about who the mother was or why she had made such a desperate decision. The baby's cries grew louder, and Harold felt something break inside his chest. He knew abandonment. He had lived it firsthand when his own children kicked him out after his wife passed, and he turned to drinking. But seeing a child so small, so helpless, left like this on the sidewalk, stirred every protective instinct he had. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, gently rocking the bag. "Uncle Harold's here, but what now?" Harold looked at his scattered belongings on the ground, at his dirty clothes, at the state he was in. How could he care for a baby when he could barely care for himself? His first thought was to find help. Harold knew the city's rhythm. In a few hours, the first workers would start passing by. He could stop someone, ask them to call social services. But something inside him hesitated. He'd heard stories about what happened to abandoned children in the system, and this baby. There was something about that little face that tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't explain. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. Harold decided he couldn't stay on the street with the child. He gathered his few belongings and began walking through the still sleeping city, carrying the baby with all the care in the world. His steps led him to Union Square, where he knew there was a 24-hour police station. But when he reached the station's door, he paused. 2 incidents he'd witnessed in recent months played through his mind like a movie. A neighbor from the community where he lived before ending up on the streets had given up her grandson for adoption, and the child simply vanished into the system, leaving the family with no information. Another time he saw a young mother being treated with contempt by public officials when she sought help to care for her child. What if they don't believe me? Harold thought, looking at his wrinkled clothes and unshaven face. What if they think I had something to do with this baby? The suspicion wasn't unfounded. Harold had learned the hard way that society viewed homeless people with a mix of fear and disdain. How many times had he been shooed away from public places, accused of petty thefts he didn't commit, or simply treated as if he were invisible? The baby stirred under the blanket, letting out a small sound, and Harold felt he couldn't just hand the child over to anyone, at least not yet. Maybe he could care for the baby for a few hours until he figured out a better way to help. Harold knew Mrs. Margaret, an 80-year-old woman who lived alone in a small apartment near Union Square. She had always been kind to him, sometimes offering a plate of food or letting him use the building's faucet to wash up. Maybe she could help, at least with advice. When he reached the building, the night doorman, Mr. Anthony, recognized him by sight. He was a man in his 50s, also black, who always treated Harold with respect. "Harold, what's going on?" Anthony asked, eyeing the bag Harold carried so carefully. "Mr. Anthony, I found an abandoned baby on the street. I don't know what to do. Is Mrs. Margaret awake?" Anthony stepped closer and saw the child. His expression shifted completely from curiosity to genuine concern. "Good Lord, what in the world? I'll call Mrs. Margaret, but she usually wakes up early anyway to take her medication." A few minutes later, Margaret came down in her nightgown and slippers, her grey hair disheveled, but her eyes wide awake. When she saw the baby, her hands flew to her chest. "Blessed Virgin, where did you find this child, Harold?" Harold told her the whole story, showing her the note he'd found. Margaret listened quietly, shaking her head sadly. "Poor mother. She must have been desperate to make such a choice," she murmured. "And you did the right thing not going straight to the police. Knowing how things work, they'd just suspect you. Mrs. Margaret, do you think I could take care of him, at least until we find his mother or a good family to adopt him?" Margaret looked at Harold with affection. She'd known him for 2 years and understood that despite his hardships, he was a good man. He had been a history teacher for over 20 years, before his life fell apart with the loss of his wife and the alcoholism that followed. "Harold, you have a good heart, I know that. But taking care of a baby is serious. You need diapers, milk, a doctor, and you're living on the streets." I know," Harold interrupted. "But look at him, Mrs. Margaret. So small, so helpless. If I hand him over to the system now, he'll just become another number. They might not even find him a good family." Margaret sighed deeply. She too knew the flaws in the public system and understood Harold's concerns. "Listen, you can stay in my apartment tonight. Let's see if we can figure something out. But this can't last long, understand? A situation like this could bring trouble for all of us." Harold nodded gratefully. Going up to an apartment after months of sleeping on the streets felt like an unimaginable luxury. Margaret's place was simple but cozy: 2 small bedrooms, a tiny living room with an old but clean sofa, and a kitchen with basic utensils. "Our first thing is to give this child some milk," said Margaret, picking up the bottle from the bag. "I'll warm it up a bit. Do you know how to hold a baby?" Harold shook his head. He and his wife had never had children of their own, and his stepchildren were already teenagers when he married Teresa. Margaret showed him how to support the little head, how to hold the tiny body, how to offer the bottle. When the baby began to nurse, his little eyes opened for the first time. They were light brown, curious, and seemed to look straight at Harold. In that moment, something shifted in the man's heart. It was as if an instant connection formed between them. "What are you going to name him?" asked Margaret, watching Harold's expression. "I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't name him. What if his mother shows up or the family who adopts him wants to choose another name?" "Harold, while he's with you, he needs a name. He can't just be the baby." Harold thought for a moment, gazing into those little eyes that seemed to trust him completely. "Ethan," he finally said. "I've always liked that name. It means heard by God. Maybe God heard this mother's desperate plea and put me in the right place at the right time." Margaret smiled for the first time since she'd come down from her apartment. "Ethan is a beautiful name. Now let's see if he needs a diaper change." Spending the day in Margaret's apartment was an eye-opening experience for Harold. Ethan slept most of the time, waking only to nurse every 3 hours, but caring for him awakened an energy in Harold he hadn't felt in years. It was as if he'd found purpose again. Margaret, in turn, proved to be an endless source of baby knowledge. She had raised 4 children and helped care for several grandchildren before they moved to other cities for work. "The first thing we need to figure out is where you'll stay," she said that afternoon. "I can't let you stay here too long. I live in a government-subsidized senior building, and there are strict rules about visitors and other people living here." "I understand, Mrs. Margaret. I'm already a burden." "Don't say that," she cut him off. "You're no burden. But we have to be practical. This child needs stability, a safe place to stay." That afternoon, they discussed several options. Harold could look for a shelter that accepted men with children, but Margaret knew most didn't allow that. He could try applying for public housing, but the waiting list was years long. "What about your family?" Margaret asked. You've never talked much about them, but maybe in a situation like this? Harold's face closed off. It was a painful subject, a wound that still bled even after 3 years. My stepchildren kicked me out after Teresa passed. Said I was drinking too much, that I was a burden. They wouldn't even listen when I tried to explain the drinking was just a way to numb the pain of losing her. But maybe now, with a child involved— No, Mrs. Margaret, they made it very clear they wanted nothing to do with me, and I don't want to expose Ethan to that kind of rejection. As evening fell, a new worry arose. Ethan grew fussy, crying more than he had all day. Margaret checked him and noticed he had a slight fever. Harold, this boy needs to see a doctor. Babies are very fragile. Anything could be serious. But how? I don't have his documents, no health insurance. We'll have to take him to the clinic. It's the only way. The walk to the neighborhood clinic was tense. Ethan cried in Harold's arms, and Harold felt utterly lost. How could he explain the situation to the doctors without them thinking he'd done something to the child? When they arrived at the clinic, it was already closing time, but they managed to get in for emergency care. The nurse who greeted them, a young woman named Patricia, gave Harold Johnson a strange look as he carried the baby. "What's your relation to the child?" she asked, following protocol. Harold hesitated. Margaret held his arm, offering silent support. "I found him abandoned. I'm taking care of him until I find a solution." Patricia's expression changed immediately. She called the supervisor, and soon a small crowd of staff had gathered around them. Questions flew. Where exactly had he found the baby? Why hadn't he gone to the authorities right away? Was he sure he didn't know the parents? "Look, all I want is for the boy to be examined," Harold said, trying to stay calm. "He has a fever. He needs medical attention." The on-duty doctor, Dr. Henry, finally appeared. A man in his 40s, tired from the long shift but more understanding than the administrative staff. "Let's take care of the child first," he said. "We'll handle the paperwork later." The exam revealed Ethan had a minor ear infection, common in very young babies. Nothing serious, but it needed antibiotics. The problem was, the medicine had to be given regularly, every 8 hours, for a week. "Can you follow the treatment properly?" Dr. Henry asked, clearly concerned about the unusual situation. "I'll make sure he takes it right," Harold replied firmly. Dr. Henry hesitated. By law, he should report the case to Child Protective Services immediately. But there was something about the man's sincerity, the tender way he held the baby, that made him pause. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice, "I'll give you the medicine and instructions, but you need to understand I can't pretend this didn't happen. I'll have to report it to the proper authorities." "How much time do I have?" Harold asked. "I'll wait 24 hours before filing the report. That's the most I can do." When they left the clinic, Harold was panicking. 24 hours wasn't enough to solve anything. What if CPS showed up at Margaret's apartment? She could get in trouble for harboring an irregular situation. "Margaret, you need to step back from this. I can't let you face problems because of me." "Don't be silly, Harold. We'll figure this out together." But when they got to the building, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. The building management had received an anonymous call reporting an irregular situation in Margaret's apartment. The superintendent, Mr. Dwight, was waiting for her at the front desk. "Margaret, you know you can't have unauthorized people living in your apartment, especially children who aren't family. It's against all housing program rules." Margaret tried to explain it was just temporary, an emergency, but Dwight was firm. If the situation wasn't resolved immediately, he'd have to report it to higher management, which could result in Margaret losing her apartment. "I understand your situation," Dwight said, looking at Harold without hostility but with resolve, "but I can't turn a blind eye. Rules exist for a reason." Harold felt his world crumbling. In less than 24 hours since finding Ethan, he'd already caused trouble for 2 people who only wanted to help, and the child still needed antibiotics regularly. "All right," he said, his voice choked. "I'll leave right now." "Sorry for the trouble, Margaret." "Harold, wait." "No, ma'am, you've already done enough. I can't let you lose your home because of me." Margaret followed him outside, where night had completely fallen. The New York City cold was biting. And the thought of spending the night on the street with a sick baby was terrifying. "At least take this," she said, handing him a bag with some items she had gathered: clean blankets, a few more bottles, and a small coat for Ethan. "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret, for everything. You're an angel. Harold, you have my number. If you need anything, call me, and take good care of Ethan." Alone on the street with the baby, Harold felt more lost than ever. Where could they spend the night safely? How would he keep Ethan warm and safe? And how would he give the medicine at the right times? Harold knew a few places where homeless people gathered to spend the night more securely, but most weren't suitable for a child. Finally, he remembered a stairwell at a nearby church where the priest often let people sleep when the weather was bad. When he reached St. Anthony's Church, he found Father Joseph locking the side door. He was a man in his 60s with white hair, known for his kindness to those in need. "Harold?" What a surprise. The priest paused when he saw the child. "What happened?" Harold told the story again, showing the note, explaining about the medicine. Father Joseph listened quietly, concern growing on his face. "My son, you're in a very difficult situation. Taking care of a baby is no joke, especially in your circumstances." "I know, Father, but I can't just abandon him like they did to me. This boy needs someone who cares about him." Father Joseph sighed deeply. He'd known Harold for 2 years and knew his story. He also knew that despite his struggles, Harold had a good heart. "Listen, I can let you stay in the parish hall tonight. It's heated and safe, but tomorrow we'll have to find a permanent solution." The parish hall was simple but cozy. Harold made an improvised bed with the blankets Margaret had given him and laid Ethan down beside him. The baby seemed calmer after taking the medicine but was still clearly uncomfortable. That night, Harold barely slept. Every sound Ethan made jolted him awake. At 3 in the morning, when it was time for the next dose, he carefully woke the baby and managed to get him to take the antibiotic. "You'll be okay, Ethan," he whispered. "Uncle Harold won't let anything bad happen to you." But even as he said it, Harold knew he was making promises he might not be able to keep. How could he protect a child when he had no protection himself? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Father Joseph arrived early with hot coffee and bread. He found Harold awake, holding Ethan, who had just finished a bottle. "How was the night?" "Okay, all things considered. Ethan took his medicine on time, and his fever seems a little lower." Father Joseph sat beside them, clearly deep in thought. "Harold, after speaking with some colleagues last night, I learned a few things about the legal side of this. It's not as simple as you think." "What do you mean, Father?" "Well, legally speaking, finding an abandoned child and not reporting it to the authorities right away could be considered unlawful custody, even if your intentions are good." Harold's stomach turned to ice. "So, I could be arrested?" "Not necessarily, but it could complicate things for you and for Ethan." "What if I turn him in now?" "That's exactly the problem. After more than 24 hours without reporting it, the authorities will question your motives. They might think you were trying to hide something." Harold Johnson ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of the situation. It was as if every decision he made only complicated things further. "Father, what would you do in my place?" "Honestly, I don't know. It's a very difficult situation, but I have a suggestion. Do you know Dr. Emily?" Harold shook his head. "She's a social worker, handles tough cases. She's a good person, doesn't judge anyone by appearances. Maybe she can help us find a way to resolve this without harming you or Ethan." "Do you think she'll be willing to help?" "I'll call her now. Emily has experience with complicated situations like this." An hour later, Dr. Emily arrived at the church. She was a woman in her 40s, with brown hair tied in a ponytail, dressed in simple but elegant clothes. Her expression was serious but not hostile. Harold told the story once more, sharing every detail, answering Emily's questions with complete honesty. She examined the note, asked about Ethan's health, and wanted to know exactly where and when he had found the child. "Mr. Johnson," she finally said, "I'll be very frank with you. Your situation is extremely complicated. Legally, you should have contacted the authorities immediately." "I know, doctor, but I was afraid—" "And your fear isn't unfounded," she interrupted. "Unfortunately, homeless people face a lot of prejudice, even from professionals who are supposed to help. But now we need to think about what's best for the child." "And what is best for him?" Emily sighed, looking at Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully in Harold's arms. "Ideally, we'd find the birth mother, understand why she made this decision. Maybe with the right help she could keep the child. And if we can't find her, then we'd have to look for an adoptive family. The process is long, very bureaucratic, but eventually we find good families." "What about me? Can I keep him?" Emily hesitated before answering. "Mr. Johnson, to adopt a child, a person needs to prove stable income, adequate housing, the ability to provide education, health care. You understand your current situation doesn't meet those requirements, right?" Harold lowered his head. He knew it was true, but hearing it stated so bluntly hurt like a stab to the heart. "But there is a possibility," Emily continued, "that we might explore." "What is it?" "If we can demonstrate that you're capable of getting back on your feet, securing housing and work, you could apply to be a temporary foster parent. Meanwhile, we'd keep looking for a permanent solution." "Foster parent?" "It's a program where people temporarily care for children who can't stay with their birth families. It's not adoption, but it allows the child to stay in a family environment while the situation is resolved." For the first time in 2 days, Harold felt a glimmer of hope. "What do I need to do?" "First, we'll have to legalize the situation immediately. I'll go with you to Child Protective Services to report the case formally. Second, you need to secure housing and work quickly." "But how am I supposed to get a job and a place to live when I'm homeless?" "That's where teamwork comes in. I know some people who can help, but I won't lie to you. It's going to be very hard, and there's no guarantee it'll work out." Harold looked at Ethan, who was waking up and starting to stir. When the little boy opened his eyes and looked straight at him, Harold felt that inexplicable connection again. "Dr. Emily, I'll do anything, absolutely anything. This boy deserves a chance in life, and I'll fight for him." "Then let's start now. First, we'll go to Child Protective Services." The visit to Child Protective Services was one of the hardest experiences in Harold Johnson's life. Even with Emily by his side for support, the questions were tough, and sometimes even hostile. The caseworker assigned to them, Barbara Wilson, was a woman in her 50s, efficient but visibly skeptical about Harold's story. "Mr. Johnson, you expect me to believe you just found this abandoned baby and decided to care for him out of the goodness of your heart?" "That's exactly what happened," Harold replied, trying to stay calm. "And it didn't occur to you that you might be putting the child in danger, given your living conditions?" Emily stepped in before Harold could answer. "Barbara, Mr. Johnson brought the child for medical attention as soon as he realized he was sick. That shows responsibility, not neglect." "Dr. Emily, with all due respect, you're living on the streets. How can you provide the basic care a baby needs?" The question was fair, but the way it was asked made the prejudice behind it clear. Harold felt anger rising, but Emily squeezed his arm, signaling him to stay calm. "Ms. Wilson," Harold said, steadying his voice, "I understand your concerns. I know my situation isn't ideal, but in 2 days, I've cared for this boy better than whoever left him on the street, and I'm here asking for help, trying to do the right thing. And what do you propose as a solution?" "I want to apply to be a temporary foster parent. Dr. Emily said it's possible if I can secure housing and a job." Barbara let out a humorless laugh. "Mr. Johnson, do you have any idea what you're suggesting? People wait years on public housing, lists, and getting a job at your age without a fixed address." "I'll make it happen," Harold interrupted. "I'll do whatever it takes." Barbara studied him for a long moment, clearly doubtful. "Fine, I'll give you 2 weeks to provide proof of housing and income. If you can't, the child will go through standard adoption channels, and even if you do, you'll still have to complete the entire foster care evaluation, which could take months." "And where will Ethan stay in the meantime?" "For now, he'll be placed in a group home for infants. There, he'll receive all necessary care." Harold's heart shattered. Losing Ethan now, after bonding with him, felt unbearable. "Please, Miss Wilson, let him stay with me a few more days. just until I can at least find a place to live. Impossible. The responsibility is too great. If anything happens to this child under your care, it's on me. Emily tried to negotiate, explaining she'd already found a temporary place where Harold could stay with Ethan while sorting out the paperwork. But Barbara wouldn't budge. The decision is final. The child will go to the group home today. Mr. Johnson, you have 2 weeks to prove you can provide for a child. Otherwise, he'll be placed for adoption. 2 hours later, Harold stood at the door of Holy Angels Group Home, holding Ethan for the last time. The staff were kind but firm. From that moment on, Ethan was their responsibility. You can visit him twice a week, explained the coordinator, Mrs. Rose, a kind woman in her 60s. Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. Harold looked down at Ethan, who slept peacefully, unaware of everything happening around him. Take good care of him, he whispered to Mrs. Rose, and please, tell him Uncle Harold won't give up. I'll come back for him. When he left the shelter, Harold felt as if he had lost a part of himself. In just 3 days, that child had become the center of his world, the reason he wanted to fight again. Emily was waiting for him on the sidewalk. Mr. Johnson, I know, it's hard, but now it's time to work. 2 weeks isn't much time. Where do we start? First, let's look at your housing options. I know a few boarding houses that might accept your situation. They're not ideal, but they can serve as a temporary address. The first boarding house they visited was in the Lower East Side. The building was old, poorly maintained, with a strong smell of dampness and mold. The owner, Mr. Augustus, was a man in his 70s, distrustful and only interested in the money. $500 a month, payment up front, no exceptions, he said, not even bothering to show the room. Mr. Augustus, Mr. Johnson is in a temporary situation, Emily explained. He's trying to get back on his feet to care for a child. I don't care about the story. $500 up front or nothing. Harold didn't even have $50 in his pocket. The second boarding house had similar prices, and the result was the same. The third one wouldn't even let them in when the owner saw Harold's appearance. Dr. Emily, how am I supposed to pay rent if I don't have a job? And how can I get a job without an address? It's a vicious cycle, I admit, she said. But let's try a different approach. What kind of work did you do before? I was a history teacher. I worked for 22 years at a public school. Do you still have your teaching license? I think so. I never cancelled it. Emily smiled for the first time that day. That's very good. Teachers are always needed, especially for private tutoring. Let's see if we can find you some students. But who would want lessons from someone in my situation? Leave that to me. I have some contacts. What matters is that you're qualified, and you are. For the rest of the afternoon, Emily made several calls. She had a wide network, built over years of working with difficult social cases. By evening, she had found 2 job possibilities for Harold. The first is tutoring a 15-year-old girl who's struggling with history. Her mother, Mrs. Clare, is willing to pay $50 per lesson twice a week. And the second? A prep course for civil service exams needs a substitute teacher for contemporary history. It's not permanent, but they pay per class, and they're in urgent need. Harold felt a glimmer of hope. $100 a week from the tutoring, plus whatever he could earn from the prep course, might be enough for at least a simpler boarding house. Dr. Emily, how can I thank you for everything you're doing for me? By getting this job and proving you can take care of Ethan. That boy needs someone to fight for him, and from what I've seen so far, that someone is you. That night, Harold slept in the parish hall again, but for the first time in days, he managed to sleep a few hours straight. He had a plan, he had hope, he had a reason to fight. The next day, Emily took him to meet Mrs. Clare and her daughter Brittany. They lived in a middle-class apartment in Midtown. Mrs. Clare was divorced, worked as a secretary at an accounting firm, and was worried about her daughter's low grades in history. Brittany just can't get interested in the subject, Mrs. Clare explained. She says it's all boring, that she doesn't see any point in studying the past. Harold talked with Brittany for a few minutes and quickly understood the problem. The girl was smart, curious, but the way she had learned history in school was all about memorization and disconnected from reality. Brittany, do you like music? He asked. I do. Why? Did you know that the national rock scene of the 80s was a form of protest against the dictatorship? The lyrics by Rage Against the Machine and Bruce Springsteen were disguised ways of criticizing the government. Britney's eyes lit up. Really? Like they could have been arrested because of the songs? Exactly. History isn't about memorizing dates, Britney. It's about understanding how people lived, how they fought, how they managed to express their ideas even in tough situations. Mrs. Clare was impressed by how Harold had sparked her daughter's interest in just a few minutes. When can you start? Tomorrow, if you'd like? Perfect. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 6, $100 a week. Is that okay? It was exactly what Emily had mentioned. Harold left feeling like he'd taken the first real step toward reclaiming his life. The prep course was downtown. The coordinator, Professor Oakley, was a man in his 50s who knew Harold by name from his years working in the public school system. Harold Johnson? Of course I remember you. You taught at Benjamin Franklin, right? Excellent teacher. What happened? Why did you leave? Harold hesitated. Telling the truth about his situation could cost him the job. Personal issues, Professor Oakley. But now I'm trying to get back on track. I see. Well, we urgently need someone for contemporary history. The main professor had to step away for health reasons. Can you start next Monday? Absolutely. Great. It's 3 classes, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings. $40 per class. It's not much, but it's a start. Harold did the math in his head. 100 from the private lessons plus 120 from the prep course. $220 a week. It wasn't much, but maybe enough. For a cheap boarding house with a little left over for other expenses. With work lined up, the next step was finding a place to live. Emily had found a different option. A house in Greenwich Village, where a family rented out rooms at more affordable rates. The house belonged to Mrs. Carman, a 70-year-old widow who had lost her husband the year before and was renting rooms to supplement her pension. It was a simple but clean house in a neighborhood Harold knew well. The room is small, but it has the basics, Mrs. Carman explained, showing him a space with a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a small desk. $350 a month with access to the kitchen and bathroom, utilities included. It was cheaper than boarding houses, and Mrs. Carman seemed like a decent person. More importantly, she didn't ask about Harold's past or judge him by his appearance. Can I pay a week in advance and the rest at the end of the month when I get paid for the lessons? Mrs. Carman hesitated, but something in Harold's sincerity convinced her. All right, but if you're late, you'll have to leave. I won't be late, Mrs. Carman, you have my word. A week after meeting Ethan, Harold was living in a house, had 2 jobs lined up, and was starting to believe he could regain custody of the child. But there were still many obstacles ahead. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. The first private lesson with Britney was a success. Harold prepared material on the Civil War, but instead of focusing on dates and names, he told the story like a drama. The political intrigues, the betrayals, the characters with their ambitions and fears. Professor, this is so much more interesting than what we learn in school, said Britney at the end of class. That's because I'm telling the story as it really happened, with real people facing real problems. History isn't just for museums, Britney. It's about people like us. Mrs. Clare was delighted with her daughter's progress and even increased the lessons to 3 times a week, which meant an extra $50 weekly for Harold. The tutoring program was also going well. The students loved how Harold explained the material, always connecting historical events to the present. Professor Oakley was so pleased that he offered him another class on Saturdays. Within 2 weeks, Harold was earning nearly $400 a week. It was more money than he'd seen in 3 years. He managed to buy new clothes, shave regularly, and even save a little. But what mattered most were his visits to Ethan. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Harold went to the Holy Angels foster home to spend 2 hours with the child. Ethan was growing, developing well, but Harold noticed that with each visit the baby seemed more distant. It's normal, Mrs. Rose explained. Babies adapt quickly to their surroundings. Here, he has different caregivers, a different routine. It's a defense mechanism. But does he still recognize me? Of course he does. Look how much calmer he gets when you hold him. It was true. Ethan would settle in Harold's arms, but it wasn't the same instant connection as in those first days. That worried Harold deeply. With just 1 week left before Barbara's deadline, Harold went to the child welfare office with all the documents: proof of residence, bank statements showing steady income, a clean criminal record, and even a letter of recommendation from Professor Oakley. Barbara examined everything carefully, clearly surprised at how quickly Harold had gotten his life in order. "I must admit, Mr. Johnson, I didn't expect you to manage it, but these are just the minimum requirements. Now comes the hard part." "What part?" "The foster family evaluation. There'll be a full social study, psychological assessment, home visit, preparatory course. It could take 3 to 6 months. And Ethan stays in foster care all that time?" "Unfortunately, yes, unless a family comes forward to adopt him before then." Harold's heart froze. "What do you mean, a family interested?" "Ethan is a healthy baby, which makes adoption much easier. We already have 3 families interested if one of them is approved first." "But I found him. I took care of him. Doesn't that count for anything?" "Mr. Johnson, what matters is the child's best interest. A stable family with good financial standing can offer him far more than you can." Harold left the child welfare office in shock. After fighting so hard, discovering he might still lose Ethan to another family was devastating. Emily tried to comfort him, saying there was still hope, that the adoption process took time too, but Harold knew his chances were slim compared to middle-class families looking to adopt. The first psychological evaluation happened a week later. The psychologist, Dr. Fern, was a young woman specializing in adoption and foster care. "Mr. Harold, I'll ask you some questions about your life, your reasons for wanting to care for Ethan, your plans for the future. Be honest. It's crucial." The questions were tough. Dr. Fern asked about losing his wife, his struggles with alcohol, the years he'd spent on the streets. She wanted to understand why he felt so connected to Ethan, whether he was confusing the child with a son he'd never had. "Dr. Fern, I'm not trying to replace anyone or anything. I just look at that boy and feel he needs me, just as much as I need him. It's not pity, it's not loneliness, it's real love. And if a young, financially stable family shows up who also wants to adopt Ethan, how would you feel? Sad, of course, but if it's truly better for him, I'll have to accept it. I just don't think it would be." "Why not?" "Because family isn't just about financial stability. It's about who's willing to fight for that child, even when everything seems lost. It's about who was there during the hard times." The second step was the home visit. The social worker, Ms. Monica, went to Mrs. Carmen's house to inspect the living conditions. Harold's room was impeccable. He had bought a used crib, baby furniture, and had everything set up, ready to welcome Ethan. Mrs. Carmen had even offered a larger room for the same price, impressed by Harold's dedication. "The conditions are adequate," Ms. Monica noted, "but it's a small space for a child to grow up in." "It's temporary," Harold explained. "I'm saving up to rent a bigger apartment in a few months." "And is Mrs. Carmen aware there would be a child living here?" "Yes, she even offered to help when needed. She has experience with grandchildren." Mrs. Carmen, who was present, confirmed everything and added, "This young man is one of the most decent people I've ever met. Any child would be lucky to have him as a father." All that was left was the foster family preparatory course. It consisted of 8 weekly sessions where Harold would learn about child development, children's rights, how to handle abandonment trauma, and other related topics. The course was held in a room at the downtown courthouse, alongside 15 other people interested in becoming foster parents. Most were middle-class couples, some were single, but Harold was clearly the oldest and the only one who had lived on the streets. In the first few sessions, Harold felt out of place. The others talked about decorated rooms, private schools, family vacations. He talked about providing emotional stability, about teaching through example that it's possible to start over, even when everything seems lost. It was during the 4th session that things changed. The speaker, Dr. Lucy, was talking about children who had suffered abandonment. These children need someone who deeply understands what it means to feel rejected, what it means to have to fight to survive. They need someone who knows that love sometimes isn't enough, but that it's still worth fighting for. Harold completely identified with those words. During the group discussion, he spoke about his own experience with abandonment, how he had lost himself after his wife's death, and how finding Ethan had given him a reason to live again. "You might think I can't offer much to a child because of my financial situation," he said to the group. "Maybe you're right. I can't give vacations, private school, or a big room, but I can give something you might not be able to. I know what it's like to be lost and find hope again. I know what it's like to be judged by appearances and discover you're worth so much more. That boy will grow up knowing that no matter what happens in life, it's always possible to start over." The silence that followed was profound. Some people were visibly moved. One of the participants, a woman named Anne, said, "Harold, I came here thinking I could help a child because I'm financially stable. But hearing you, I realize maybe a child needs much more than that." From that day on, Harold felt more accepted. In the group, people started approaching him during breaks, wanting to hear more of his story. Some even asked for advice on how to deal with their own struggles. But not everything was going well. During the 5th week of the course, Mrs. Rose from the foster home called Harold with concerning news. "Mr. Harold, I need to speak with you in person. Can you come here today? Did something happen to Ethan? He's healthy, but a situation has come up that we need to discuss." Harold cancelled a private tutoring session and rushed to the foster home. He found Mrs. Rose visibly worried. "Mr. Harold, a family has taken a specific interest in Ethan. They're financially well off and have already passed all the screenings. They want to speed up the adoption process. But I'm still taking the course. I know, and I'm rooting for you. But they have legal priority. They've already completed the entire process. You're just starting." "Who are these people?" "A young couple. He's a doctor, she's a university professor. They've tried having children for years without success. They seem like good people, genuinely interested in giving Ethan a good life." Harold felt his world crumbling again. After 2 months of fighting, organizing his life, proving he could care for Ethan, a perfect family had appeared to take him away. "How much time do I have?" "Their process could take 4 to 6 weeks. Yours, if all goes well, another 2 months. So I'll lose him." "It's not decided yet, Mr. Harold, but I have to be honest. Their chances are much higher." That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He stared at the empty crib he'd set up in the room, imagining Ethan sleeping there. Was he being selfish for wanting to keep the child? Would a young, stable family really be better for Ethan? But every time he thought of giving up, he remembered Ethan's little eyes looking at him that first morning. He remembered the connection he'd felt, the absolute certainty that they needed each other. The next day, Harold sought out Emily to talk about the situation. "Dr. Emily, I need to know if I have any real chance of keeping Ethan or if I'm just fooling myself." Emily sighed deeply. "Harold, I'll be honest. Legally, this family has many advantages over you, but there's something they don't know." "What?" "Ethan still reacts differently with you. The caregivers noticed he's calmer, more at ease when he's in your arms. That can be taken into consideration." "How can I use that to my advantage?" "By continuing to visit him regularly, maintaining that bond. And most importantly, finishing the course and evaluation as quickly as possible. If you get approved before them, you'll have a chance." Harold returned to the course with renewed determination. He studied every night, participated actively in discussions, asked questions, and demonstrated knowledge and readiness. In the second to last week of the course, something unexpected happened. One of the speakers, Dr. Richard, a child psychology specialist, was talking about bonds between children and caregivers. Sometimes a child develops a special bond with someone who wouldn't be the obvious choice by conventional standards. But that bond, when genuine, can be more important than any other factor. After the lecture, Dr. Richard approached Harold. "Mr. Harold, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course, Doctor. I've followed your participation in the course and have been very impressed. I also heard about your situation with Ethan. May I ask you a personal question?" "Go ahead. Why do you want so badly to keep this child?" And don't give me a pretty answer. I want to know the real reason. Harold thought for a moment before responding. Dr. Richard, for the past 3 years, since I became homeless, I've felt like a ghost. People looked right through me, as if I didn't exist. When I met Ethan for the first time in a long while, I felt needed, not because he needed just anyone, but because he specifically needed me. There's a connection between us that I can't explain, but I know it's real. And aren't you afraid you won't be able to give him everything he deserves? I'm afraid, yes, but I'm even more afraid of not trying. That boy reminded me of who I was before I lost everything. He made me want to be a better person. If that's not a father's love, I don't know what is. Dr. Richard smiled. Mr. Harold, let me give you some advice. In the final course report, besides the technical evaluation, there's space for special notes about participants. I'll write something about you that might help your case. Really? What will you write? That in 20 years of evaluating foster family candidates, I've rarely seen someone with such genuine motivation and strong determination. And I believe Ethan would be very lucky to grow up with you. Harold left the course that night more hopeful than he'd been in weeks. Maybe he still had a chance. But the next day, Mrs. Rose called again with news that would change everything. Mr. Harold, you need to come here right away. Something happened with Ethan. What is it? Is he okay? He's healthy, but... Mr. Harold, it's better we talk in person. Harold rushed out of the training, cancelled all his classes for the day and went straight to the foster home. He found Mrs. Rose waiting with an expression he couldn't decipher. Mr. Harold, sit down. What I'm about to tell you will be very hard to hear. Mrs. Rose, for heaven's sake, just tell me. Ethan's mother showed up. The world stopped for Harold. All these months he'd imagined many possibilities, but never the birth mother returning. What do you mean? She showed up? She came here this morning. A young woman, very nervous, said she wrote the note and left the baby on that street. She wants her son back. Harold felt his legs weaken. And can she just take him away? Legally, if she can prove she's really the mother and show she's capable of caring for the child, yes. She's the birth mother. Where? Has she been these 4 months? It's a complicated story. She said she had severe postpartum depression, couldn't care for the baby, and was afraid she might hurt him, so she gave him up. She spent these months in psychological treatment. And she's better now. According to her, yes, she brought medical records, prescriptions, proof she's in therapy. Harold ran a hand over his face, trying to process the information. Does she know about me? That I found him and have been trying to keep him? She does, and she wants to talk to you. To me? Why? She said she wants to thank you for taking care of her son when she couldn't. And she also wants to understand what kind of person you are. Is she here? She is. Do you want to talk to her? Harold nodded, even though he knew that conversation might mean the end of all his dreams with Ethan. Ethan's mother was named Leah, 22, years old, a nursing student. She was a pretty girl, too thin, with deep dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. When she saw Harold, she stood and extended her hand. You're Harold. I'm Leah, Ethan's mother. Nice to meet you, he replied, unsure how to act in that situation. Mr. Harold, I wanted to thank you for taking care of my son when I couldn't. I know it wasn't easy, especially in your situation. No need to thank me. I should be thanking you for him coming into my life. Leah studied him curiously. Is it true you're trying to adopt him? Not adopt, foster, and only because I thought you weren't coming back. And now that I'm back? Harold hesitated. It was the hardest question she'd ever faced. Leah, can I ask you something? Why did you abandon him? Leah began to cry. Because I was sick, Mr. Harold, very sick. I had postpartum depression, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I'd look at Ethan and feel nothing. Or worse, I'd feel anger, as if he were to blame for all my problems. And the father. He left when he found out I was pregnant, said he was too young to have kids. I was alone, trying to care for a baby with no support. Why didn't you seek official help? Because I was afraid they'd take him away for good. I thought if I left him on a busy street, someone would find him quickly and care for him better than I could. Harold felt his heart break, not with anger toward Leah, but with pity. She'd made a desperate choice in an impossible situation. And now I've been in treatment for 4 months. I take medication, go to therapy twice a week. My family supports me. My mother moved in to help. I'm better. Much better. Leah, can I ask you a hard question? Go ahead. Do you want Ethan back because you truly feel ready to be a mother, or because you feel obligated? Leah thought a long moment before answering. Honestly, I don't know. I miss him, I think. About him every day. I feel guilty for abandoning him, but I don't know if that's the same as being ready to be his mother. What if I told you I desperately want to keep him? That these 4 months he's become the son I never had? Then things get complicated, don't they? Harold nodded. Leah, could you give me a chance to prove I can be a good father to him? How so? Give me a few days to finish my evaluation process. If in the end you still want to take him, I won't fight you. But let me at least finish what I started. Leah studied him for a long moment. Mr. Harold, could I visit Ethan? With you? I want to see how he reacts to each of us. It was a fair request, but it terrified Harold. What if Ethan responded better to his birth mother? What if it was obvious she was the right choice? All right, he finally said. Let's see what's best for him. Mrs. Rose brought Ethan in, awake and alert. When he saw Harold, he smiled and reached out his little arms. Harold lifted the boy, and Ethan immediately snuggled against his chest. Hello, Ethan, Harold whispered. How are you, little one? Ethan babbled incoherently, but clearly content. Leah watched with an uncertain expression. May I hold him? She asked. Harold passed Ethan to her. The boy stiffened slightly at first, but didn't cry. Leah tried talking to him, but Ethan stayed quiet, studying her with curiosity, nothing like the familiarity he showed Harold. He doesn't recognize me, Leah said, her voice thick. He was just weeks old when you were separated, Mrs. Rose explained. It's normal he wouldn't remember. But with Mr. Harold, he acts like they've known each other forever. Because Harold's visited regularly for 4 months, they've bonded. Leah handed Ethan back to Harold, and the boy relaxed instantly. Mr. Harold, can I be honest? Please. Seeing you two together, it's obvious there's a special connection, but at the same time, I'm his mother. I have rights, but also responsibilities. What are you proposing? That we spend a week visiting him together every day. We'll see how he reacts to each of us, how we feel. At the week's end, we'll decide what's best for him. It was a risk for Harold, but it was fair. If Ethan truly belonged with his birth mother, he'd have to accept it. All right, 1 week. During that week, Harold and Leah spent 2 hours a day together with Ethan. They were difficult but revealing conversations. Leah talked about her difficult pregnancy, the traumatic birth, and the first days at home when she couldn't stop crying. I'd look at him and feel like he was an alien, she confessed. I knew I should love him, but all I felt was exhaustion and despair. Harold, in turn, shared about his life before the streets, the loss of his wife, and how finding Ethan had given him a reason to live. Leah, you're still very young. You can start over, have other children when you're truly ready. I'm 62. This is my last chance to be a father. But Mr. Harold, he's my son. How can I just hand him over to someone else? You're not handing him over. You're giving him the chance to have a father who deeply wants to care for him. During that week, it became increasingly clear that Ethan had a preference for Harold. Not that he rejected Leah, but he was visibly more comfortable, more secure with the man who had cared for him in his earliest days. Leah noticed it too, and Harold could see she was struggling with the situation. It's like he chose you, as his father, she said on the 5th day. Leah, I know it's hard, but maybe he's showing us what's best for him. But what if I regret it? What if years from now I want him back? Then we'll talk. I won't keep you from being part of his life if you want to. You can be like a special aunt. A special aunt? Leah, you're 22. You'll finish college, meet someone special, have other children. You don't have to carry the weight of abandoning Ethan if you can turn this into a decision of love. What do you mean? You can choose to leave him with someone who loves him deeply, instead of forcing a situation that might not be good for either of you. On the last day of the week, Leah arrived at the shelter with a decision made. Mr. Harold, I talked a lot with my therapist, with my mother, with myself, and I've come to a conclusion. Harold held his breath. Ethan chose you, and I'll respect his choice. "Leah, but I have some conditions." "What are they?" "I want to visit him sometimes, not as his mother, but as the person who gave him life. And when he grows up, I want him to know the truth about everything that happened. You have my word. Ethan will know he has two people who love him, the father who chose to raise him, and the mother who was brave enough to let him be raised by someone who could care for him best." Leah signed all the necessary papers to formally relinquish her rights to Ethan. Mrs. Rose handled all the legal documentation. The Child Welfare Council, faced with this unusual but clearly consensual resolution, quickly approved Harold's foster family application. 2 weeks later, Harold left Holy Angel's shelter carrying Ethan in his arms, this time for good. "Let's go home, son," he whispered. Ethan, as if understanding the significance of the moment, nestled against Harold's chest and closed, his little eyes with a small but perfect smile. The homecoming was emotional. Mrs. Carmen was waiting at the door with the nursery all prepared. She had even bought a colorful mobile to hang over the crib. "Welcome to the family, Ethan," she said, cradling the baby. That night, Harold laid Ethan in the crib he had lovingly assembled months earlier. The child slept peacefully, and Harold stood watching for a long time, still unable to believe this was really happening. But life with Ethan brought new challenges. Caring for a child full-time was very different from 2-hour visits. Ethan would wake up several times during the night, had colic and needed constant attention. Harold had to completely reorganize his routine. He managed to move some private tutoring sessions to times when Ethan was asleep, and Professor Oakley was understanding, allowing him to bring the child to some prep school classes when necessary. "I've never seen students pay so much attention in class," Professor Oakley joked. "It's like Ethan's presence makes everyone more focused." It was true. The students fell in love with the child, and some even offered to look after him during class when Harold had no other option. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were nights when Ethan cried for hours and Harold couldn't calm him down. There were moments of despair when the child got sick and he didn't know what to do. There were times he questioned if he was doing the right thing. It was Mrs. Carmen who helped the most during those tough moments. With her grandmotherly experience, she taught Harold about colic, teething, and how to interpret different types of cries. "Harold, raising a child, is just like this," she said one of those difficult nights. "You learn by doing, by making mistakes, by trying again. What matters is love, and you have plenty of that." 6 months after Ethan came home, Harold had completely settled into his new life. He'd rented a bigger apartment, established a routine, and Ethan was growing up healthy and happy. Leah stayed in touch, visiting the child once a month. Harold always welcomed her warmly, and she gradually built a loving relationship with Ethan, without trying to take on the role of a mother. "Mr. Harold, seeing the two of you together, I know I made the right decision," she said during one of those visits. "Ethan is happy, and you've become an even more special person. Leah, you made a brave choice too, and look how well you're doing now." It was true. Leah had finished her nursing course, gotten a job, and was dating a classmate from college. She seemed like a completely different person from the desperate young woman who had once left a baby on the sidewalk. A year after finding Ethan, Harold returned to the same street where it all began. He brought the child, who was now walking, and saying a few words. "This is where our lives changed, Ethan," he said, pointing to the sidewalk. "This is where we found out we needed each other." Ethan, of course, didn't understand the significance of that place, but he ran down the sidewalk laughing, completely happy. In that moment, Harold reflected on everything that had happened. 12 months earlier, he'd been a lost man with no prospects, living on the streets. Now he was the father of a wonderful child, had work, a home, and a purpose in life. More than that, he'd proven to himself and everyone else that family isn't defined by money or social conventions. Family is defined by love, dedication, and the willingness to fight for the well-being of those we care about. "Daddy!" Ethan called out, running toward Harold. It was one of the first times the child had used that word, and Harold felt his eyes fill with tears. "Yes, my boy, Daddy's here." As he scooped Ethan into his arms and walked down the street that had changed their lives forever, Harold knew he hadn't just found a son, he'd found himself. 2 years later, Ethan was playing in the small backyard of the apartment Harold had managed to rent in a better neighborhood. He was a bright, affectionate child, full of energy. Harold had established himself as a sought-after private tutor in the area with a steady roster of students, and had even given a few talks about his experience to social support groups. "Professor Harold," a social worker had said during one of those talks, "your story is proof that it's never too late to start over, and that family has much more to do with love than anything else." Leah continued visiting Ethan regularly and had become a steady but quiet presence in their lives. She was engaged to her college sweetheart and had landed a job at a maternity ward where her personal experiences made her especially sensitive to struggling mothers. "You know, Mr. Johnson," she said during one visit, "I think our story had the right ending for everyone. Ethan has a father who loves him more than anything. I found myself as a person, and you discovered you could be a family. Leah, you'll always be part of this family. Ethan is very lucky to have people who care about him." That Sunday afternoon, as he watched Ethan play in the backyard, Harold thought about how an abandoned bag on a cold sidewalk had changed not just one life, but many. He thought of Mrs. Margaret, who remained a grandmother figure to Ethan, of Father Joseph, who took pride in helping during those first difficult moments, of Emily, who had become a lifelong friend, of Mrs. Carmen, who treated Ethan like a beloved grandson. He thought of Professor Oakley, who had given him the chance to restart professionally, of all the students who adored Ethan and followed his story, of Dr. Richard, whose report had been crucial in approving him as a foster parent. And most of all, he thought of how an abandoned child had saved a lost man, just as he had saved the child. "Daddy, come play," Ethan shouted from the yard. "Coming, son." As he got up to play with the child who had changed his life, Harold knew he had found something he thought was lost forever: a family, a home, a reason to wake up every day with hope in his heart. The story of a mother who left a bag on the sidewalk had become the story of a father who found a son, a child who found a home, and many people who discovered that family is far more than blood. It's about love, dedication, and the courage to fight for those we love. Ethan would grow up knowing he was loved not just by those who raised him, but by those who had the courage to let him be raised by those who could love him best. And Harold would grow old knowing that, on a cold sidewalk in the early morning, he had found the chance to become the best version of himself. 5 years had passed since that fateful dawn. Ethan was now a 5-year-old about to start school, curious about everything, with endless energy and a smile that lit up any room. Harold, at 67, had become a pillar of the community. He still tutored privately, but now also volunteered in programs supporting the homeless and struggling families. "Professor Johnson," a young social worker said during a meeting where he served as an advisor, "your experience is key to helping us understand there are no lost causes, just people who need a chance." The house they lived in was small but cozy. Harold had managed to buy a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, with a backyard where Ethan could play safely. The walls were decorated with the child's drawings, photos of special moments, and a shelf full of history books Harold read to Ethan every night. Leah had married and was expecting her first child. She remained part of Ethan's life, whom he knew as Aunt Leah. It was a warm relationship with no confusion about roles. Harold was the father, and that was clear to everyone. "Uncle, Harry," said Ethan one afternoon, using the affectionate nickname he had created for Harold, "were you ever a kid like me?" "Yes, my boy. A long, long time ago." "And did you have a daddy who took care of you?" "Yes, I did. And a mommy, too." "And where are they now?" It was a question Harold knew would come someday. Ethan was at an age where he was starting to understand the world around him better and asking more complex questions. "They've gone to heaven, my boy. It's been a long time." "What about me? Do I have a mommy who went to heaven too?" Harold took a deep breath. He had spoken with psychologists many times about how and when to tell Ethan the whole truth about his origins. "Ethan, you have a mommy who is alive and loves you very much. It's Aunt Leah." "Aunt Leah is my mommy? She's the mommy who brought you into the world. But I'm the daddy who chose to take care of you every day." Ethan was thoughtful for a few moments. "Uncle Harry, why doesn't Aunt Leah live with us? Because sometimes people need different paths to be happy. Aunt Leah has her family and we have ours." "But I like our family." "I like our family very much too, my boy." It was amazing how Ethan accepted the explanation so naturally. To him, this was just normal reality. A father who loved him unconditionally, a special aunt who visited regularly, and a network of loved ones who were part of his life. Ethan starting school was an important milestone. Harold was nervous, worried about how other parents would react to his age and their unconventional family situation. On the first day of school, while waiting in line for registration, he overheard some comments. How strange, an older gentleman with such a young child. Could he be the grandfather? Maybe he's a widower raising his grandson. Harold was used to these kinds of remarks and no longer let them bother him, but he was concerned about how it might affect Ethan. Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Christine, was a woman in her 40s, experienced and kind. At their first meeting, she was direct. "Mr. Harold, I know you have a special story. Ethan told me you're his daddy. To me, that's what matters. A child needs love and stability, and it's clear he has that." "Thank you, Mrs. Christine. I was worried about possible prejudice. Mr. Harold, in 20 years of teaching, I've learned that a happy family is one where there's love. The rest is just details." Ethan adjusted quickly to school. He was sociable, smart, and curious. Soon he made many friends and became popular with classmates and teachers. But there were a few incidents that required discussion. At one parent-teacher meeting, a mother made an unpleasant remark. "I don't think it's appropriate for children to be exposed to such different family situations. It might confuse the other kids." Harold was there and heard the comment. Before he could respond, another mother spoke up. "Excuse me, but what strange situation? A devoted father raising his son with so much love. My husband could learn a thing or two from Mr. Harold." Several other mothers agreed, and the first woman was clearly embarrassed. "Mr. Harold," the principal said after the meeting, "I want you to know that Ethan is very loved here, and you're respected by all of us. Some prejudices, unfortunately, exist, but they don't represent our school community." Ethan also faced a few situations at school. One day, he came home sad. "Uncle Harry, John said you're too old to be my daddy." "What did you say to him?" "I said you're the best daddy in the world and being old doesn't matter." "And how did that make you feel?" "I felt a little sad, but then I remembered all the fun things we do together, and then I was happy again." Ethan, sometimes people say things that can hurt, but what matters is what we feel in our hearts. "Do you know how much I love you?" "I do, and I love you too, Uncle Harry." These little challenges only strengthened the bond between father and son. Harold used every situation as an opportunity to teach Ethan about tolerance, respecting differences, and how love can take many different forms. Ethan's 6th birthday was a special celebration. Harold organized a party at school with all his classmates in attendance. Leah came with her husband and their newborn baby, Mrs. Carmen, Mrs. Margaret, Father Joseph, Emily. Everyone was there. "Uncle Harry," Ethan said, blowing out the candles on his cake, "this was the best birthday of my life. Every one of your birthdays is special to me, my son." At that party, watching Ethan surrounded by friends and embraced by so many people who cared for him, Harold reflected on how life had taken a turn he could never have imagined. 6 years earlier, he had been a hopeless man, sleeping on sidewalks, with no future in sight. Now he was the father of a wonderful child, had a community of loved ones, a job he adored, and most importantly, a reason to wake up every day with gratitude in his heart. But not everything was smooth sailing. At 67, Harold began to feel the weight of age more intensely. Some mornings he woke up with joint pain and fatigue he hadn't experienced before. He started worrying about the future. What if he got sick? What if he couldn't care for Ethan until he grew up? These concerns led him to make some important decisions. First, he organized all the legal paperwork to ensure that if anything happened to him, Ethan's future would be secure. Second, he began saving money more diligently, setting up a fund for the child's education. But most importantly, he started teaching Ethan about independence and responsibility, always in an age-appropriate way. "Ethan," he said during one of these talks, "you're growing up and getting smarter every day. You need to learn some important things. Like what, Uncle Harry? How to take care of yourself, how to be a good person, how to face life's challenges. But you'll always take care of me, right? I'll take care of you as long as I can, and then you'll take care of yourself. But no matter what happens, I'll always love you. These conversations were difficult, but necessary. Harold knew he had to prepare Ethan for a world where he might not always be physically present, but where the values and love he had instilled would remain forever. By 7, Ethan was a confident, affectionate, and intelligent child. He had inherited Harold's love for books and stories, spending hours listening to his father tell tales of different times and places. Uncle Harry, will I be a teacher like you someday? You can be whatever you want, my son. A teacher, a doctor, an engineer, an artist. What matters is choosing something that makes you happy and helps others. I want to help people. The way you helped me. What do you mean? You found me when I was alone and took care of me. I want to do that for other kids too. Harold's heart swelled with pride. Ethan was learning the most important lesson of all, that we receive love so we can give love. For Ethan's 8th birthday, Harold planned a different kind of party. Instead of just celebrating, he wanted to turn the occasion into an act of kindness. Ethan, how about this year, instead of getting lots of presents, we donate toys to children who don't have any? That's a great idea, Uncle Harry. But can I pick the toys? Of course. You get to choose what you want to give to each child. They went to a foster home for children, the same one where Ethan had stayed when he was a baby. Mrs. Rose, now retired but still visiting the children regularly, was moved to see them. Ethan, look how much you've grown. And what a handsome young man. Hi, Aunt Rose, I brought toys for the kids. Ethan spent the whole afternoon playing with the younger children, handing out the gifts he had carefully chosen. Harold watched, seeing how his son had naturally developed a sensitivity for caring for others. Mr. Harold, said Mrs. Rose, this boy has a heart of gold. You've done a wonderful job. Mrs. Rose, I think he was born this way. I just tried not to get in the way. Don't be modest. Children reflect the love they receive. Ethan is like this because he was raised with so much love. That night, on their way home, Ethan asked a question that deeply touched Harold. Uncle Harry, was I also a child who was alone like those kids? You were alone when I found you, yes. And if you hadn't found me, someone would have found you and taken care of you. There's always someone willing to help a child in need. Like you, like me, like Aunt Rose, like so many good people in the world. Am I lucky to have you as my dad? I'm the lucky one to have you as my son, Ethan. The years passed and Ethan grew into an exemplary boy. By 10, he was one of the top students in school, had many friends, played sports and learned music. But most of all, he had developed a generous and empathetic personality. Harold, now 72, felt the effects of age more, but he remained active and dedicated. He had cut back on private tutoring but still volunteered and spent more time with Ethan. Uncle Harry, Ethan said one Sunday afternoon, can I ask you something about when you found me? You can ask me anything, my boy. Why did you decide to take care of me? Weren't you scared? It was a question Harold had expected for years, and one he had thought about many times. Ethan, when I saw you in that bag, so small, so helpless, something inside me woke up. It was like I'd been asleep for years and suddenly opened my eyes. I was scared, yes, very scared. Afraid I wouldn't be able to care for you. Afraid I wouldn't be good enough. But I was even more afraid of abandoning you. And you never regretted it? Never, not for a second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Ethan. You saved me just as much as I saved you. How did I save you? You gave me a reason to live again. You reminded me I was someone who could love and be loved. You taught me family isn't about blood, it's about choice and dedication. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, taking in his words. Uncle Harry, when I grow up and have my own family, will you still be my dad? Always, my son. Being a father isn't a temporary job, it's for life. And I'll always be your son? Always. No matter where you are, what you're doing, how many years go by. You'll always be my son and I'll always be your father. At 12, Ethan began showing interest in understanding his story better. He already knew Leah was his birth mother, and had talked with her about it many times, but he wanted to know the details. Harold decided it was time to tell him the whole truth, leaving nothing out. "Ethan, you're old enough now to understand everything. Do you want me to tell you the whole story?" "Yes, I do." Harold told him about that cold dawn, about finding the bag, about reading the note. He told him about the difficult early days, the challenges he faced, how he almost lost custody when Leah came back. "And Aunt Leah could have taken me away?" "She could. Legally, she had every right." "Why didn't she?" "Because she realized you were happy with me, that we had a special connection, and because she wasn't ready to be a mother yet." "Is she ready now?" "She is, but now you already have a family. She chose to let you grow up where you were happy." "That was very generous of her." "It was." "Aunt Leah made a very brave and generous decision." Ethan grew thoughtful. "Uncle Harry, do you think I should live with her?" "Ethan, do you want to live with her?" "No, I like Aunt Leah, but you're my dad. I want to stay with you." "Then that's the right answer. Family is where we choose to stay, where we feel loved and safe. What if one day I want to get to know Aunt Leah's family better? We'll get to know them together. They're part of your story too." Ethan's adolescence was surprisingly calm. Harold had prepared for a difficult phase, but Ethan remained a well-balanced, respectful and affectionate boy. By 15, he was as tall as Harold, had good grades in school, dated a classmate, and dreamed of studying medicine to help people like my dad always did. To Uncle Harry, he said during a conversation about the future, "I want to study at a good university, but I know it's expensive. I can work to help with the costs. Ethan, I've had money saved for your education for years. You don't need to worry about that." "Really? Since when?" "Since you were little. I always knew you were smart and would want to study. I saved up, bit by bit." "Uncle Harry, how can I ever thank you for everything you've done for me?" "By being happy, my boy. By being a good person. By making a difference in other people's lives. That's the only thanks I want." At 17, Ethan was accepted into a public university to study medicine. The celebration was held at their home with all the friends who had been part of their journey over the years. Leah was there with her family, proud of the boy who had grown into an exemplary young man. Mrs. Carmen, now over 80 but still sharp, was beaming. All the teachers who had known Ethan, his school friends, the neighbors. Speech, speech, and the guests cheered. Ethan stood up, a little shy but determined to speak. "Everyone, I'm not great with words, but I want to thank all the people who've been part of my life, especially my dad," he said, looking at Harold, "who taught me that family is a choice, that love is action, and that it's always possible to start over." Harold was crying along with half the guests. "Uncle Harry," Ethan continued, "you picked up an abandoned baby on the sidewalk and turned him into the man I am today. I hope one day to be half the father you've been to me." That night, after everyone had left, father and son stayed on the porch talking. "Ethan, when you go to university, you'll live in the student dorms. It'll be the first time we're apart. I'm nervous but also excited. That's normal, it's part of growing up. But I want you to know that whenever you need me, I'll be here." "I know, Uncle Harry. And you, will you be okay alone?" "I'll miss you, of course, but I'll be proud knowing you're chasing your dreams. Can I come home every weekend?" "You can come home whenever you want. This will always be your home." When Ethan left for university, Harold, now 77, felt a mix of pride and melancholy. The house grew quieter, the routine completely changed. But he knew he'd fulfilled his mission. He'd raised a good man ready for life. Ethan came home on weekends, called every day, and shared his university experiences with Harold. He was doing well in his studies, made new friends, but remained the same affectionate and respectful boy he'd always been. "Uncle Harry," he said during one of their calls, "I told my story to some classmates here at college. They were impressed. They say you're a hero." "I'm no hero, Ethan, just a father doing what any father would do. Not every father would take in an abandoned baby and dedicate his whole life to raising him. When you find a child who needs you and you need them, it's not a sacrifice, it's a gift." During his college years, Ethan matured even more. He participated in social projects at the university, volunteered to teach underprivileged children, always guided by the philosophy he'd learned from Harold, that we receive love so we can give love. In his 4th year of medical school, Ethan met Claire, a classmate from a family of doctors, a traditional household. When she introduced him to Harold, there was an initial moment of discomfort from her parents, who didn't understand Ethan's family situation. "Mr. Johnson," said Claire's father, Dr. Robert, the first time they met, "Ethan told us your story. It's unusual. Dr. Robert, I know our family isn't conventional, but I can assure you Ethan was raised with love and strong values." "That's clear. Ethan is an exceptional young man. I was just curious about how it all happened." Ethan recounted the whole story to Claire's family, from the moment he was found up to the present. Mrs. Margaret, Claire's mother, was visibly moved. "Mr. Johnson, what a beautiful story. You literally saved this boy's life." "Truth is, he saved mine, Mrs. Margaret." From that day on, Claire's family embraced Harold as one of their own. Dr. Robert often said he wanted to learn about fatherhood from Harold, and Mrs. Margaret treated Ethan like a son. Ethan graduated from medical school with honors, specializing in pediatrics, always saying he wanted to care for children because he knew how much they needed love and attention. At 25, he proposed to Claire. The wedding was simple but emotional, held at the same church where Father Joseph had welcomed Harold and Ethan in those difficult early days. Father Joseph, now in his 80s, officiated the ceremony. "Ethan and Claire," he said during the service, "you're proof that love builds families in the most unexpected ways. Ethan, you are the fruit of the purest love there is. Love that's chosen, not bound by blood." Harold sat in the front row at 82, leaning on his cane but beaming. When Ethan approached him before the ceremony, father and son shared a long embrace. "Uncle Harry, thank you for teaching me what it means to be a real man." "Ethan, thank you for teaching me what it means to be a father. Now I'm starting my own family, but you'll always be my dad. And you'll always be my son. No matter how many children you have, how many grandchildren I have, our bond is one of a kind and forever." A year after the wedding, Ethan and Claire announced they were expecting their first child. Harold, now a grandfather, was even more excited than Ethan expected. "Uncle Harry, are you sure you want to be a grandfather at 83? "Ethan, I became a father at 62. Why wouldn't I be a grandfather at 83? "What? If I need your help with the baby? I'll be here for whatever you need. I have experience with babies, remember? When Mary was born, that's what they named Harold's first granddaughter, he was at the hospital waiting eagerly. When Ethan came out of the room holding the baby, he approached his father with tears in his eyes. "Uncle Harry, I'd like you to meet Mary, the world's best grandfather." Harold took the little girl in his arms, and Mary looked at him with the same curiosity Ethan had 25 years before. "Hello, Mary," he whispered. "You're very lucky to have Ethan as your father. He learned everything I knew about being a dad, and even added things I didn't know." At 85, Harold began feeling the effects of age more intensely. He had trouble walking, his memory sometimes failed him, and he needed more care. Ethan and Claire insisted he come live with them. "Uncle Harry, you took care of me when I needed it. Now it's my turn to take care of you." "I don't want to be a burden, Ethan. You never were and never will be a burden. You're my father, and a father's place is with his family." Ethan and Claire's house was big enough to comfortably accommodate everyone. Harold had a room on the ground floor, adapted for his needs, and spent his days helping care for Mary and reading stories to her, just as he had done with Ethan. Grandpa Harry, Mary, now 3, would say, "Tell the story about the baby in the bag." It was her favorite story, which Harold told in a way suited to her age, always emphasizing love and family. "Once upon a time there was a man who was very lonely," he began, "until he found a baby who was also alone, and then they discovered they could form a family together. And they lived happily ever after. They lived happily ever." After My Sweet Girl, Ethan watched these scenes with immense gratitude, seeing his father tell stories to his granddaughter, passing on values and love, completed a perfect circle. At 87, Harold began to feel his time was coming to an end. He wasn't sick, just tired. like someone who had fulfilled his mission on Earth. "Ethan," he said one Sunday afternoon, "I want to talk to you about some important things." "Of course, Uncle Harry." "First, I want you to know I've lived a full and happy life. These 25 years raising you and now being Mary's grandfather have been the best years of my life." "Uncle Harry, don't talk like that." "Let me finish. Second, I want you to know you made me a better man. You taught me about unconditional love, about family, about how it's possible to start over at any time. You're the one who taught me all that. Third, I want you to keep passing on these values to Mary and any other children you and Claire have. Our family story is special, and it needs to be remembered. I'll always tell our story, Uncle Harry. And lastly, I want you to know that when my time comes, I'll go in peace, knowing I fulfilled my purpose in life." "What was your purpose?" "To love you, raise you, and see you become the extraordinary man you are today. There's no greater purpose than that." Ethan was crying but tried to stay strong. "Uncle Harry, how will I manage without you?" "The same way you always have, by being a good person, loving your family, helping those in need." "You don't need me anymore, Ethan. You're ready to be the head of the family." "I'll always need you. I'll always be in your heart, in your memories, in the values I passed on to you. Part of me will live forever in you and in Mary." 3 months. After that conversation on a quiet autumn morning, Harold didn't wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, just as he had always wished. The wake was a celebration of the life of a man who had turned abandonment into love, loneliness into family, and despair into hope. Hundreds of people attended, former students, families he had helped, the entire community touched by his story. Ethan, even in his grief, managed to give a moving speech. "My father always said we receive love so we can give love. He received very little love as a child, lost his wife's love in middle age, but when he found me, he discovered he still had so much love to give. And that love multiplied, reached hundreds of people, and created a family where there was only abandonment. Today I understand that the story didn't begin when he found me on that sidewalk. The story began when he chose to love instead of walking past indifferently, when he chose to fight instead of giving up, when he chose to be a father instead of just being someone who found a child. My father taught me that family isn't about blood, but about choice. That love isn't just a feeling, but an action, that it's never too late to start over and never too early to make a difference in someone's life. Today, looking at my daughter, I know I'll keep passing on these values. The love story that began on a cold sidewalk will continue through generations because true love is eternal. Leah, now a mature woman with her own family, was also there. At the end of the ceremony, she approached Ethan. "Ethan, your father was the most generous man I ever knew. He took the son I couldn't care for and made him an extraordinary man. I'll always be grateful for that. Aunt Leah, you were part of our story too. Your act of courage made all this possible. Ethan, promise me one thing." "Of course. Tell this story to Mary, to your other children. It's important they know love can come from the most unlikely places." "I'll tell them, Aunt Leah. Always." Years later, when Mary was a young adult, studying to become a social worker, Ethan kept his promise. He told her the whole story, from the early morning he was found to Harold's final days. "Daddy," Mary said, "what an incredible story. Grandpa Harry really saved you." "Actually, Mary, we saved each other. He gave me a family and I gave him a reason to live. Do you think I'll find someone to save too?" "Mary, you already are. Choosing to be a social worker, wanting to help struggling families. You're carrying on your grandfather's legacy." "What legacy?" "The legacy that love is action, family is choice, and that one person can completely change another's life just by deciding to care." Mary graduated with a degree in social work, specializing in adoption and foster care. In her first professional talk, she shared her grandfather's story. "I knew a man who at 62, living on the streets, found an abandoned baby and decided to be a father. That man taught me, through my family's story, that there are no lost causes, only people waiting for someone to believe in them. My grandfather always said we receive love so we can give love. Now I understand my work is helping build families where that love can flourish, whether through blood or choice. So the story you'll hear today proves family is so much more than social conventions. Family is where there's love, dedication, and the courage to fight for those we love. And so, the story of a mother who left a bag on the sidewalk became the story of generations who learned that true love knows no barriers, isn't bound by conventions, and has the power to change lives in ways we could never imagine. Harold was gone, but his legacy lived on in every life he touched, every family he helped build, every person who learned from his story that it's never too late to love, never too late to start over, and never too late to make a difference in the world. The abandoned bag on a sidewalk had become a family spanning generations, proving that sometimes the most beautiful endings begin with the hardest beginnings. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're reading from. If you have something to share, leave us a sincere comment. Do you think Harold made the right choice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.